Hey, I'm Allen Firstenberg,
Hi, I'm Ankur Kotwal.
and welcome to Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.
Ankur, it is fantastic to have you on. This is really a privilege for me.
The privilege is all mine, Alan. I see the great work that you do, and I was so thrilled when you invited me.
No, this is really an honor. You are the global head of cloud DevRel. Did I get the title
Advocacy,
right?
Global Head of Cloud Advocacy.
Global head of cloud advocacy. That seems like a massively important job and a lot to do. Why don't you kind of explain to folks what it is you do, what the scope is, and how you got there?
Yeah, sure. So my team is called Global Advocacy. We're a team that's part of developer relations in Google Cloud. And our focus is really to drive mindshare and adoption for Google Cloud all over the world. And, you hear about a lot of companies talking about meeting developers where they are. Our team thinks of meeting developers where they are geographically.
Wow, okay.
And so we want to be where there's the strongest developer communities, where there's large developer populations, so that we can engage with developers. And developer relations at Google has always been a bi-directional role. We have an outbound piece where we get to go to conferences and do presentations, write blog posts, record videos, publish code labs, and deliver workshops. But we also have an inbound side of our role where we're listening to developers, we're engaging with developers, getting feedback about our products, also trying to just stay on top of trends. What are the latest frameworks? What are the latest tools that folks are using?
Have that conversation with developers so that you're meeting them where they are. Not,
Yeah.
The geographically, the technologically, you're meeting their needs.
Absolutely, yeah. We want to make it easy for you to use Google Cloud, whether that's you're using the full stack or you're using bits and pieces of it. We recognize that developers have a very heterogeneous environment. They use tools and frameworks from many different vendors, and we welcome that.
Very cool. So tell us, how did you get here? How did you get to be the global head of this really important position for developers?
It's actually a really long story, so I hope you don't mind for a little bit of story
We've
time.
got, what did they say we had? Another 2 or 3 hours?
Yeah, I think it was 4 or 5
Something
hours.
like that, yeah.
No, so actually it goes back to when I was a kid. My dad was a software developer, and he used to work work in the evenings, actually, quite a bit. And so I'd sit beside him and just hang out with Dad while he coded. And that's what gave me that initial passion to become a developer. And so I remember we got to a point at one stage where he was like, you know what, you should try this. You should give this a go. Now I'm going to age myself here by saying this, but he came home one day with a thick book of basic programs in the basic language.
Yes, that was where I got my start as well.
Yeah, and so DOS 3.3 was the operating system that we had back then, MS-DOS. And so I used GW Basic. I wrote an address book. That was my first application that I wrote. Partly copied the code that was in the book, but then I customized it as well. And from that moment, I knew that tech and coding was my thing, my calling. So that's how I really got into this space of being a developer. And I went to high school and did university in Sydney. I grew up in Sydney, and I did a software engineering degree there. But actually, one of the great things about my software engineering degree is 18 months into it, you were supposed to go and find a full-time job and work for 6 months, and then come back and sort of then share that experience. And you're supposed to do 2 6-month of these, they called it engineering experience. And I found this local company, a startup in Sydney, that hired me as a test engineer, and they hired me as a full-time engineer at that point in time. And so I didn't just work for 6 months, I just kept the job. And within a few months, I was actually, I sort of got promoted from a test engineer to a software engineer to a technical lead. And so I got to write real software, contribute to a patent, which has my name on it as well.
Oh, very cool.
But, it was all enterprise software at that point in time. I moved on to another role as well where I was doing enterprise software, but this was a global company, an American company, but with a global presence. So I had a great opportunity to lead engineering teams in Sydney, in Shanghai, and in Bangalore, all sort of simultaneously. But whilst enterprise software was interesting, I knew about this company, Google. I loved Google's ethos. Their search engine was so cool.
And this was how long ago?
Oh, this is in 2000 and I mean, I wanted to work for Google for the longest time, but 2006, 2007, I was really interested in Google. But it wasn't until Google put out the Android SDK, I believe it was 0.8 of the Android SDK, that I started to actually use some of Google's developer platform. And I built my first app, and then they published the 0.9 SDK where they changed all the interfaces.
Of course they did, because of course, that's what you do.
Well, it was pre-release software. And at that point, I had to throw away my code and start from scratch. And I got frustrated and I put it aside. But I could see that there was something there and that mobile devices and mobile software was going to take off. So I came back to it. I also like to play video games. So I built an app that allowed me to track my friends' stats with some of the games we used to play and compare them. I published it onto, it used to be called the Android Store at that point, not Google Play. I published it on there, and I started to attend a local meetup, the Sydney, what is now the Google Developer Group. And while I was there, I was open sourcing my code, so I started to present it at the meetup, and I got tapped on the shoulder by a Googler. Shout out to Brett Morgan, who's still at Google Sydney. And he said, hey, you should apply for this role in Android developer relations. I had no idea what developer relations was. But I was interested. It was Android, it was Google. So that's how I actually got my foot in the door at Google. It was just sheer passion and an interest, not because I was gunning for a role in developer relations.
So it's very cool. And it does kind of explain how you moved from developers to developer relations.
Yeah.
I'm kind of curious, how many people on your team have done that kind of move, and how many are moving from different non-developer positions into developer relations?
Oh, actually, just generally at Google, we have folks from all walks of life. I worked with a product manager at one point who used to be a Cirque du Soleil performer.
Oh, wow.
Another one that used to be a wedding celebrant and used to go on weekends and marry people. So we've had people from all walks of life. And coming to developer relations specifically, we get a lot of folks that are really passionate about technology, but also have like a theatrical background as well. And we've got a few folks like that. But ultimately, I think the thing that I see most with developer relations engineers at Google is that they have this real passion for technology. And so it's a blurry line between work and, your sort of playtime kind of thing, because there's just, really excited.
And I think that's how it is for a lot of developers, is this notion of, this is what I want. This is a passion. This is cool. This is fun. This is exciting. This has a purpose, and it's a job.
Yeah.
And I feel very, very fortunate that most of my career has been that kind of, I've lived that kind of life.
Yeah.
I haven't always been on the most exciting projects or the funnest projects or the projects with the biggest impact. But they've been significant and they've been important and they've still been fun and challenging to me.
Yeah.
And that's, I feel very fortunate that our career field as a whole lets us do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think of technology as, I live in Australia, surfing is a big thing. And so you can imagine, I think of technology as coming in waves, like waves of an ocean, right? And you can think of developers as surfers that are out there. There are so many different waves that you can catch. And ultimately, you don't have to catch every wave. One, you can't. But it's the passion for wanting to do that surfing of those waves of technology that I think is what gets people excited. And so it's not just developer relations. To your point, software engineers, DevOps folks, IT administrators, database engineers, data scientists. You can find your calling. You can find your passion in tech as a whole.
One of the things that I always love to encourage people, I've seen people come in and they're like, I don't know, I'm not sure I love playing with this stuff. I love working with this stuff. I love working with this technology. I'm not sure I really like coding or programming or, I'm like, be a tester, go into quality assurance. There's so much out there. And now there's even more.
Yes.
We've got so many roles where you can be involved and, work with programmers and not necessarily be a programmer yourself.
Yeah, fundamentally, I think people love to solve hard problems.
Yes.
And you don't just have to do it with code.
Yes.
There's so many different ways to do it.
So you said something a couple of minutes ago about how when you were brought into Google, when you were brought into developer relations, you didn't know what developer relations was.
Yes.
And I feel like lots of people lots of developers out there don't know what developer relations is. So how would you define developer relations, or what goes into developer relations? And then how do you do that on a global scale? What is the little picture and what is the huge picture?
Sure. I always think of developer relations as sort of sitting between, so you've got product managers and engineers that build products on one side, and then you've got external developers that might use those products. I feel like developer relations sits smack bang in the middle there. Developer relations engineers tend to be experts at using the products. So
okay.
a way you can think about the difference of a software engineer, let's say at Google, between a software engineer at Google and a developer relations engineer at Google, software engineers use a certain set of tools to build that developer product. It's often not the same set of tools, right? Developer relations engineers are subject matter experts in using that product. And really championing the developer experience. We want it to be easy to learn. We want it to be able to solve hard problems. We want it to be able to interoperate and integrate with other things that are out there. And so that's where developer relations fits in on the internal side of things. Externally, we also want to get the message out there. We want to build the right sample code so people can learn how to use that product easily. We go and do presentations at conferences so that we can get the latest news out to folks, share best practices, and do some enablement with running workshops and so on. So that's how I like to think of developer relations as really like kind of zeroth customers of our developer products that are really trying to just build a better developer experience and also be the champion for those developers internally. We get feedback from developers all the time that, hey, I'd love to be able to use this framework with your developer tools, or I'd love to integrate this piece of software with another piece of software. We take that back to our product teams.
That, it's a lot of what I see myself as GDE doing as well.
Yes.
One of the way I kind of describe GDEs to people is I don't work for Google, but I work closely with them.
Yes.
On one hand, I am taking what you're giving, your documentation, your explanations, your presentations, and helping developers understand why it's useful and what you can do with it. And on the flip side, taking their feedback, taking their problems, their pain points, and bringing them back to you and saying, I've got a community of people that are having problems with this or need this. How can we help?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you touched on 2 points that are really, really important to the success of any developer product. One is a community, right? You need to have a community of people that are passionate. I always say that whether you're getting really positive or really negative feedback is always valuable. It's when you get no feedback and there's like apathy for your products where, you can start to struggle.
Yeah.
And so having a group of folks that really care about either a product or a particular technology domain, could be serverless, it could be AI, it could be a language community, right? Getting a group of folks that really care about your products is really important. And then the other part that I value tremendously, and Allen, you and I have talked about this personally before, is the Google Developer Expert Program. So a GDE that you are as well, because you are an expert in the industry. You are a thought leader. There's others that follow your words. You've got a great, successful podcast.
That's a little scary, I think, but okay.
It's true, right? You have this great, successful podcast. You don't work for Google, so you can have a more independent opinion.
Yes.
You often are exposed to a lot more products than, I would be. I'm not just using Google products, but there's only so much that any one person can do. So we look to you as like a champion of the community itself, a voice of the community. And you can take that message to the community, but you can also bring it back. And we try to provide that channel for you.
I guess kind of in that vein, what are the sorts of things that you would ask me? What questions do you have for me?
Well, let me ask you something that I've been thinking about. What drives you? Why do you want to be a Google developer? Why did you want to be, and why do you continue to be?
Oh, wow. I'm not sure I've ever actually told this story on the podcast. I stumbled into it a little by accident, as I think you know, and I'm not sure how many other people know. I was one of the original cohorts in the GDE program.
Wow.
I wasn't the first one. Shout out to Lynn, who was and who deserves all that credit. But I was in that first cohort 13 or so years ago. And back then it was for a product that no longer exists called Google+. And I was brought in kind of the question that was asked to me at the time was, we have this product and we want to help people understand it. Do you understand it? What have you learned that you want to share? And I'm like, well, I do want to share. I have learned stuff. I want to help get the message out. And when I stumbled into Glass, it was the same thing. It was, this is new technology that I am barely understanding, and Google clearly barely understands. How can I help them understand it better? How can I understand it better? And then how can I take it to developers so that developers understand it better? How do we all move forward? And kind of one of the things that drove me then was, I had a lot of ideas. I had a lot of, I saw Glass could do this and it would be great if Glass did this. I didn't have the time. But if I teach 5 people how to do this, that's 5 products. And maybe one of them is one of the products that I wanted. And if I teach 20 people, that's 20 products. And if I teach 5 people and they teach 5 people, and so forth and so on, it keeps growing like that. And, so that's kind of my selfish motivation is, I want to see these products do great things because I have things that I want to do.
Right.
But I can't do them all.
Yeah. No, it's interesting. It makes me think of Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars, A New Hope, where he's like, Google Glass, that's a name I haven't heard for a long time. Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, you touched on something, I don't know whether you realized it, but what I sense from you is this real passion to help people learn.
Yes.
And disseminate knowledge. And that, I think, is core to our industry. I think any successful engineer of any sort has learned from someone, right? And I think what you do is a way of also giving back and contributing, paying it forward, perhaps.
Yes.
For the next group of folks.
No, very much. When I went to university, there was a lot of, here is Dijkstra's algorithm, and the RSA algorithm, and here are the papers by Rivest, and learning who these people were and what their contributions were to computer science and the industry from the early days. Here's Ted Nelson, who coins the term hypertext, and now years later we're turning it into reality.
Yeah.
So it was very much drilled into me. These were people that planted seeds, some of whom never saw those seeds, really come to fruition. Some of whom never saw those seeds grow up the way they expected them to.
Yeah.
I feel like, I've learned from them. It's now my job to pass it on to the next generation. And it's been exciting watching that happen.
Yeah, it's awesome. And, while we've been here at Cloud Next, I saw you at we spoke at the GDE Summit yesterday together. And I could see that, people were looking up to you to learn from you. And similarly, I could see you wanting to, do that, to give back in that sense, or pay it forward, whichever way you want.
I mean, and the example there again, as I called out in that session to Timothy Jordan, who was standing in the back. Timothy Jordan, 12 years ago, was the person who was teaching me how to develop for Glass.
Yeah.
That was his role back then.
Yeah.
And now I'm, teaching people how to develop for AI.
Yeah.
The lessons that we learned 10 years ago, 5 years ago, how do we build on that? How do I help somebody not make the same mistakes that I made?
Yeah.
So that we can do awesome things for everyone.
Yeah. And it's interesting, you've just mentioned a number of technologies. It's that metaphor again, it's those waves of technology.
Yes.
Right now. Right now, we're riding this tidal wave of AI, right? And I think it's sort of really fundamentally shifts how we are going to be able to, how we build software, how we use software. It's both for the types of software we'll build and also from a productivity perspective, how we will be building software as well.
I think the lessons, the catch though is, and I see this a lot when we, and we're going to be covering other shows on vibe coding. I'm quite sure on this. But when I see people talking about vibe coding and then saying, but this only got me so far, and then I stumbled and I had no idea what I was doing next.
Yes.
And I feel like that's where we need people to step in and say, here were the lessons that we learned the last time we tried to do no code, and the lessons that we learned from the previous time and the previous, how do we take those lessons that we learned and apply them to the technology of today? And that's important, right?
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. I think, you have to walk before you can run.
Yes.
Right. And vibe coding kind of gives you the ability to feel like you're running, but it only does take you so far. You're going to hit a point where you do have a technical challenge. And if you're not familiar with your source code or your architecture,
Or you're not even familiar with how to look into the problem. It's even fundamental questions like that. It's not working. Where do I start looking for the problem?
Agreed. I do think, though, that I've heard these sorts of arguments in the past about like object-oriented programming.
Yes.
Right? Or garbage collectors.
Right.
Right.
And I feel like, I feel like when you and I got started, we were learning in these radical high-level languages,
Yes.
like BASIC
Yeah.
and C.
Yeah.
And I feel like the generation or two before us was like, I don't understand how you're going to write a program unless you understand the assembly code.
Yeah.
And I feel like the generation before them was saying, I don't understand how you're writing an assembly code if you don't understand exactly what the bare metal is doing underneath. And I feel like at every stage, we've moved it up a little, but we still need to know the layer below to actually achieve good things.
I think so, to a point. Like, to be honest, when was the last time that you looked at machine code or assembly code?
Well,
right?
but never.
And I think that's because the programming languages provided the right level of abstraction to do that.
To move us up that level.
Exactly. And I think we're not quite there at that right level of abstraction with AI yet. And so I think there is this adoption of vibe coding, but if the machine is writing source code, if you think about a programming language, right? Why do we have programming languages? It's so that humans can understand it.
Yes.
But if humans are not writing the language or reading the language anymore, then do you need the programming language at all?
But contrariwise, and this is, I think, the argument that I make a lot, and I've made before on the show, is programming has never been about writing code. I mean,
yes.
Writing code is the tool
yes.
to
100%.
express ideas that we have logically thought out.
Yeah.
So saying we're now moving from programming language A to programming language B to a more human-like language,
yeah,
that's fine, but that's the uninteresting part of programming.
Yes.
The interesting part of programming is how do we break down a problem in the right way so that our machines can go the rest of the way.
Exactly. So I think what my prediction, if I may, is that I think we'll start to see new levels of abstraction. And, the way we code today and what AI offers us today is really a stopgap to what's coming next.
So I'm going to now turn that back around to your job. And that is, okay, that's great. What do you in DevRel now need to look at to help developers, whatever a developer is in the next 5 or 10 years? What do you as developer relations need to do to support us as developers?
Yeah, so I used to be a real fan of the show Battlestar Galactica. I don't know if
the classic one or the new one?
The new one, actually.
Okay.
All of this has happened before, and all of this will happen again. And so I think about that line in the context of this discussion. And we heard this same sort of thing when we had primarily desktop software, and then the internet came along, right? And then we started to move far more into this client-server world, and people were like, but what if my connection drops and, I can't transact anymore?
Right.
I remember when I first became a developer relations engineer and I was talking about mobile apps to developers, there was so much cynicism. Who's going to make a purchase on a screen this size, right? Like you need a computer for that. And again, we found the right ways to go about it. I think from that, if I had to take a couple of meta points away about how we might address the future, I think it's really important to know where you are today and to be able to address those problems. And you do need to be forward looking, because as you start to, be involved in either inventing the future or adopting those inventions, you need to think about how do you transition to that space. And you're going to have a few ways to do that. One is it's for the folks that are already developers today, right? Another is for the developers that are using the tools today but need to start transitioning to a new set of tools. And then you have the next generation of developers who only know that world, right? If you think about the current generation of developers graduating from university, let's say, right? Folks early in their career, they don't know a world without access to the internet.
Right.
Right? I remember I used to be a C++ developer. I used to use the MSDN libraries, and I needed to have all of the, every library documented deeply and actually stitching those things together, I had to work that out myself. There was no Stack Overflow
Right.
back then.
I was going to say, now the past few years, it's been how do you ask the right questions on Stack Overflow? The next generation is already coming in saying, how do I need to ask the right questions
To the
of
model.
Gemini?
Yeah, exactly, to your AI model. So, like, when I think about what the next 5 or 10 years bring, I think we're moving at a breakneck pace right now. It's really hard to know what things will look like. Definitely 10 years, but even 5 years from now. Because if I look at how much has changed in the last 3 years, it's been quite substantial. So we need to think about how do we make it useful today, and then how do we make it useful tomorrow. And in that tomorrow, there's the people that only start there,
Yes.
as well as the people that are going to transition to that space. So that wasn't a specific answer because I think that there's different technologies, but I think that formula works.
As we're moving forward, as we're going into these next things, how can developers interact with DevRel? What are you looking for from them? What's the best way they can, you said it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Where should developers be to be on that street, to be a part of that path?
There's a few ways I would answer that. One is I actually think there's never been a better time to build software, right? There's so many different ways to get started. And even if you are already a professional today, you're very comfortable with your current set of tools. I think, even in this conversation so far, we've mentioned so many different generational leaps that we've had in technology.
Yes.
It's required us to reskill. Like you talked about you started with the Google Plus and Google Glass APIs. The way we use APIs today is actually vastly different, right? And the types of platforms you're building for is vastly different. So I think it really, in this domain, in technology, you have to keep learning. You have to keep adapting and evolving.
On one hand, that's one of, we said earlier, one of the great things about this field is what we do and we can create it. The other, kind of trade-off to that is it means we're constantly running.
Yes.
We're constantly on this treadmill.
Yes.
And in one sense, that's fun and exciting. And on the other sense, it's exhausting.
It is. So I agree, but I'm going to go back to, because I think this metaphor is appropriate still, the waves in the ocean.
Yeah.
You can't catch every wave. You need to identify the right wave to catch. You might already be on a wave when the next wave starts. You can't just jump from your wave to another wave. And that's okay. I think we need to be okay with not, being experts at everything. I think AI is fundamentally different, just like mobile apps were fundamentally different, just like the internet was fundamentally different. And I think that is something that you should get on board. But again, that is, that's got a bunch of waves on top of that wave.
Right. Well, I mean, this podcast started almost 5 years ago now because we thought that voice and voice assistants were that wave.
Yeah.
And I think to continue your metaphor now, I think it was.
Yeah.
But it was, the first one was a smaller wave, and now we're seeing this big AI wave. But I think on the back end of it, or the crest of it, we're seeing again this return to the voice assistants being that big component behind AI, and certainly behind AI interfaces.
Yeah. So going back to your question, what can developers do? I think one is just continue to learn, continue to experiment. We have tools that are so approachable now. You can learn most things for free today. You just need a machine, right? And, the compilers are free, the tools are free, the frameworks are free. That wasn't the case when we were learning BASIC, right? Microsoft shipped GW Basic and Q Basic with DOS, but anything more sophisticated than that, Turbo Pascal, Ball and C++, you needed to buy those products.
Right, and in order to even use BASIC, you needed the manual.
Right.
Because there was nothing telling you how to use this.
Exactly, so get building. The second I would say is connect with others, find, communities that you can interact with. And then third is provide feedback. A lot of products that you see today are often launched in like early access or some sort of preview. And part of that is because, as we build these developer products, we want to expose these products to our users. And this isn't just Google. You'll see every technology company does this. We want to expose users to these products early so we can get that feedback and see if we're on the right track, right? You can't always predict what's going to happen, what's going to take, what's going to be successful and not. And there's been many examples of software that's become successful but didn't start that way. Like Twitter started as a SMS tool, right?
And Slack was a product that grew out of a company that was trying to build something completely different.
Yeah, it was in-game chat.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So for MMORPG games. And so what you'll see is like, what I'm trying to say is, number one, just start exposing yourself to this technology, start playing with it, start building. Number two, connect with the community. And number three, start providing feedback. And I think what you'll see is, most companies that have developer relations team pay attention to that feedback. And then of course, number four is just reach out to folks like me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm open. You can message me on Twitter or X. Sorry, I'm on there as well. And so, that's a more direct way to reach out to me about maybe something specific. But you may not be using the same set of tools that I'm, where my interests are or where my expertise is at. And so, again, those feedback forms really do matter. And the other thing I'll say is sometimes it's not even a form. Almost every developer product I know has a send feedback piece of like a function in its menu somewhere. You will get engagement on those things.
And it's interesting because there's always this perception that sending feedback like that goes into this black hole. I've sent, I have this big problem. I sent it out and it's a week later and the problem hasn't been fixed yet.
Yeah.
And, why not?
Yeah, look, I think, across the industry, I think we're pretty inconsistent with the way we respond to feedback, right? And I say this holistically, like literally across the industry. I think products that are certainly in the early stages of their life cycle, where you are getting private previews and betas or just like 1.0 releases, you will find that product teams are very, very attentive to the feedback that they get.
Yeah.
Something that's been around for quite a while and been stable, unless it's a critical bug, you may not get the same attention straight away.
And in some ways that's good. As a product matures, you're getting, this has been fantastic. It was great to be here with you at Cloud Next. Great to have conversations with you during this time. Folks can reach out, folks should be following you on X and LinkedIn, best places.
It's just my name, Ankur Kotwal, and that's my X/Twitter handle as well. You'll find me on LinkedIn with that handle.
So thank you for joining me here at Next, and thank everybody for tuning in. We will be back another time on Two Voice Devs.
Two Voice Devs.